Yes, after I designed Fruit Ninja, I designed Jetpack Joyride as well. This video took a long time to make because there's just so much good stuff here. Old concept sketches, photos of the team, screenshots of cut features, a lot of which has never been seen by anyone outside of Half-Brick. It's a lot to fit in, but I'm going to give it my best shot. If you haven't seen the How I Designed Fruit Ninja video, let me quickly set the scene. It was 2009 and I was running a small team of 7 at Half-Brick Studios. Thanks to the global financial crisis, the whole studio was in a precarious position. And to top it off, the last game I had designed sold like absolute garbage. So we had an ultimatum. Our team had 12 months to make 300k or we were all out of a job. And in Australia in 2009, there wasn't exactly much chance of getting a games job anywhere else. The majority of games studios in Australia had shut down, or they were on the ropes, just like us. So our team started working on 2 games at once, both for the iPhone. We figured making 2 games gave us 2 chances at success. One of these games was Fruit Ninja and, spoiler alert, Fruit Ninja saved the day. It created a heap of new jobs, tie-ins, rip-offs, skits and parodies. But Fruit Ninja wasn't our only bet. It was such a huge hit that it's kind of easy to forget the other game. A game that actually did pretty damn well in its own right and would eventually become the backbone of Jetpack Joyride. That game was Monster Dash. So much of Jetpack Joyride's DNA is owed to Monster Dash that I think it deserves its own little chapter. So the idea for Monster Dash was pretty simple. We were going to make an endless runner in the style of Adam Saltzman's fantastic Cannibal, and just like add monsters and guns? This is not exactly a super inspired idea. It's much more derivative than the starting point for Fruit Ninja.
And it's only slightly disappointing after the success of Fruit Ninja to see the studio playing it so safe.
But this was on purpose. Fruit Ninja was actually a Hail Mary, a risky bet, which is kind of hard to imagine now given how well it all worked out. But Monster Dash was our safe option. After all, at the time, we were literally fighting for our jobs, our careers, and the studio. So we were being as strategic as possible, trying to give ourselves the best odds of still being employed during a global economic crisis. These are the first prototypes Joe Gatling and I made for Monster Dash. Compared to the Fruit Ninja prototype, which was basically like one and done, we actually did a bunch of iteration on the Monster Dash prototype, doing lots of experiments with the sizes of everything and how to generate levels. For the theme, again with the idea of hedging our bets, we decided we should use an existing IP and base the game around Barry Steak Fries, from one of Half-Brick's previously successful games, Age of Zombies. The character of Barry Steak Fries, originally created by our marketing officer, Phil Larson, and originally drawn by Murray Lancashire, was a classic action hero type character, with a bit of a potty mouth. The first line ever spoken by Barry in his first game is, "Surprise, Professor for Brains." I think that tells you just about everything you need to know about Barry Steak Fries. So we threw Barry into our endless runner, along with a bunch of monsters to shoot. And as we added more to the game, we figured we should also add a bunch more weapons. We started with simple and obvious ones, like a powerful revolver and an Uzi, just like normal stuff, I guess. As we added more weapons, we started to ramp up how crazy they were, like the super powerful Mr. Zappy. But we could go further. I forget who originally had the idea, but we thought instead of just adding a weapon, we could add like a weapon plus vehicle combo. And very specifically, we wanted the motorbike plus shotgun from Terminator 2. It just seemed like it would fit Barry Steak Fries like perfectly. We made sure to include every detail, including the reload action and the sparks as the bike hits the ground and bottoms out. Next I thought, like, what else could we do like this? What weapon could we come up with that's like even more ridiculous? How about a jetpack made out of machine guns? And the machine gun jetpack was born. It was completely absurd and instantly one of our favorite things about the game. In August 2010, 4 months after we'd launched Fruit Ninja, Monster Dash was released and it actually did pretty good. Like, this version of Monster Dash would end up selling over 1 million copies. But of course, it was totally eclipsed by the world-beating Fruit Ninja. After the release, we did a couple of updates, and then my team was switched around a little. It's kind of like a lot to try and explain in this video because a lot was happening at the time. And while I was frantically working on Fruit Ninja updates with Stephen Schaff, I now had Adam Wood, or Woody as he was known, and Sierra Asher waiting on me to decide what we would work on next. For the first time basically ever, we were in a very fortunate position where we didn't need to worry about making money right away. The team's future was secured thanks to Fruit Ninja. So my plan was, let's make something small and fast and just like release it for free. It would be like a big thank you to our fans. Not really our next big game, more like a bit of a breather, something just for fun. My idea was we could make a Monster Dash spin-off starring the machine gun jetpack. We would just hack up the game and make it so you were always wearing our favorite weapon, smash out the game in 4 weeks, in time for Christmas. We already had most of the art. Should be easy, right? So one of my main goals here was to keep the game as simple as possible and make it just one button. No extra buttons for jumping, aiming, attacking, nothing. Just purely firing the jetpack. So opening up trusty Flash, I started messing around with prototyping a cave flying game, essentially like riffing on the old helicopter Flash game, except with power-ups. This is the original prototype for Jetpack Joyride. I built this in a single day and boy does it show. I mean, look at how I spelled shield. Mostly what I was learning here was how to give the physics a good balance of floaty but responsive. If the game was too floaty, it means you get frustrated that you can't get out of the way of obstacles fast enough. But if you crank up the gravity and the jetpack power to make it more responsive, then you spend all your time tapping the screen, making it hard to hold a position, and just like generally being super tiring. The next day, I sent the prototype around the whole company with a message saying that whoever gets the highest score at the end of the day wins a chocolate bar. People absolutely started flooding me with scores, which was a pretty good sign, I thought. I mean, sure, I was bribing people to play the prototype, but for a game that was supposed to only take 4 weeks, that signal was good enough for me. And so production began with the name of Machine Gun Jetpack. Our programmer, Woody, immediately got to work setting up the game, hacking Monster Dash to shreds. This is a screenshot of the game after 3 days of work. You can see we have a bunch of stuff in there already. We have all kinds of obstacles to avoid, coins to collect. Barry is wearing a hat because I wanted some kind of clothing system. Oh yeah, and also it looks like total shit. So this was the time for our artist, Sierra, to start working on defining the look of the game, which ended up landing on a kind of mix between Metal Slug with Mario proportions. Sierra had honed his pixel art skills during Half-Brick's Game Boy Advance days, so he was already super proficient in this style. But one thing to know about Sierra is that other than just being an incredible artist, he also has low vision. So the way he described it to me was, he essentially has like only peripheral vision. Like if you put some small text up on the screen and then look away from it, so it's only in your peripheral and then you try and read it, yeah, that's what it's like for Sierra all the time. But this is also kind of his superpower. Using a zoom tool on old Windows XP, he could get super zoomed in on the pixel art, and here he was able to work his magic. The pixel art was a great fit for him. There were distinct edges and not much detail. Sierra would work on the game with the tiny sprites ultra zoomed in, making sure every pixel was perfect. I think you can really get a sense of how careful and detailed his work was when you compare the Monster Dash sprites to the Jetpack Joyride sprites. The level of detail he went into was unreal. Even these tiny little posters for the lab are just so insanely well drawn. I could spend hours just scrolling through these old working files, studying the details. On the design side for me, one big job was to figure out how the procedural generation would work for the different obstacles and coin patterns. The game used a lot of lessons we learned on Monster Dash about how to place the obstacles and riding the fine line between impossible and much too easy. Fruit Ninja has a slightly unfair system where bombs can be partially obscured by the fruit. Both Monster Dash and Jetpack kind of have this same thing, where you can just get these situations that are of outsized difficulty. Monster Dash's implementation is actually pretty unsubtle, with the monsters that would just pop up right in front of you. They were never impossible to be clear, but sometimes it was just like, what the was that? And just like in Fruit Ninja, that's on purpose. We want the player to be able to assign some of the blame for dying on the game and not just wearing it on themselves. Jetpack Joyride's a little more subtle, as it comes down to a combination of obstacle size, density, and spacing. So I was designing all of this and then getting Woody to implement it, and Woody is such an outrageously fast programmer. Often I was scrambling to keep up with him. I would spend a few hours writing out how I wanted the level generation to work and what kind of controls and ramping we would need. And then before I had a chance to think about the next feature, he would just turn around to me and be like, okay, that's done, what's next? Woody also has this astonishing ability where he can somehow look at me and make eye contact while we discuss the design and program at the same time. As we would discuss how a feature would work, he's looking me in the eye and touch typing the code. I could never really get used to that. So back on the design side, an interesting thing about all our games at this point was they were all kind of an inevitable march towards death. There's no actual win condition other than getting a high score. No matter what you do, you finish by dying or losing or hitting a bomb. So it's extra important to try and make dying fun. In Fruit Ninja, you got the little fruit facts on the game over screen. Monster Dash had the same idea. Plus, there were some secret awards you could unlock. But for Machine Gun Jetpack, I saw an opportunity to kick this up to a whole nother level. Originally, when you died, Barry just vaporized and turned into dust. But to make death extra fun, we changed this to Barry kind of bouncing and ragdolling in a way through the level. You could get a little bit further, and sometimes you would even grab a few more coins along the way. Then later, expanding on this same idea, we added the slot machine, where you got to have the chance of winning a bonus or even getting blown further down the level. The overarching idea here was that it almost fades in death, if that makes sense. Instead of it being just an instant, boom, you died, game over, you had things to distract you and get you ready for the next try. This thinking was extended to the results screen as well. Over the entire development of the game, I spent so long iterating on and refining this to try and make it as fun as possible. We added automatically captured screenshots, stats, all sorts of stuff. But there was no actual editor in our game engine. It wasn't like Unity where the designer can get in there and actually lay everything out. It all had to be hard-coded in place. So poor Woody would have to implement my designs in code basically by hand, copying my terrible specs into the game. And then a week later, I would have changed my mind and want another change. Woody always made the changes gladly, and honestly, having someone who is that open to iteration is so empowering to the designer, even if I'm sure he must have secretly been getting frustrated. Another idea I had was that the game should start with a bang. Give the player a big chunk of visceral feedback that would set them up for the explosions and carnage to come. Before we had the iconic Barry explodes through the wall start sequence, Barry would actually burst through a window in the lab when you tapped the window. But pretty quickly we realized that we would need to have art of Barry facing forward, and it also just felt weird to have Barry run towards the camera and then to the left and then to the right. It didn't flow very nicely. So at this stage, we had already blown past our original 4-week plan. We were about 6 weeks deep. It was coming up to Christmas 2010, so we decided to give everyone at the company a copy of the game to play over their break, so that they could give us some feedback. This version of the game had the basics. You could fly, dodge obstacles, get a good score, but there were no vehicles, no missions, not even any scientists running around yet. The only power-ups in the game were ones that just gave you some extra points. There was also this whole system where you could skim past obstacles and get a close call bonus, which could combo up and get massive scores. It was supposed to be a huge risk-reward mechanic. But as it was, consensus was that the game was just kind of boring. And on top of that, the pressure was starting to build. The App Store landscape was changing, games were getting bigger and more featured. Releasing something so simple after Fruit Ninja kind of started to feel like it would have a half-baked vibe. Everyone was waiting for what we would release after Fruit Ninja. So the game just wasn't ready. Breaking down playtesters' feedback is always hard, and a lot of people told us that the game was boring, but this is pretty ambiguous, right? Like, my initial read on this was that the game needed more variety in order to be more interesting. So we actually spent a few weeks trying to add all kinds of different power-ups to the game to make it more compelling. We had all the things you might expect, like slow-mo, a shield. It was pretty uninspiring, to be honest. These just didn't really work out. The game still felt really flat and one note. So after a few weeks of head scratching, I finally had a moment of inspiration. It wasn't just boring because it needed more things on screen. I mean, it needed that too, but that wasn't the only factor. It was boring because the intensity of the game was always the same. Like, you were always exactly one hit away from death. The game started off slow, ramped up, and then you were kind of like edge of your seat until you died. Some intensity was good, but the game spent so long in this zone that it made it feel especially one note. So interestingly, the solution to the intensity problem is actually related to the player's health. For example, if the game had 3 hearts instead of just 1-hit kills, then the intensity usually starts pretty chill and then ramps up every time you take a hit. This is exactly how it worked in Monster Dash. So we tried just bringing this across. This did change it up, but it wasn't the right solution. Next up, we actually tried like a modern first-person shooter method where, like, when you take a hit, the edges of your screen get all red and you've got the heartbeat, and you need to be really super careful not to take another hit right away. This changed things a lot again, but still it wasn't quite right. And then, once again, looking back at Monster Dash, inspiration struck with the old badass hog power-up. The brilliant part of the hog as a power-up is not only does it add heaps of variety by changing the visuals and the physics, it also acts kind of as a shield. And the whole part where you grab the hog and the game slows down and you do a big wheelie, this is such a nice break from the intensity of the game. So we added the hog back and immediately the game felt like it came to life. The pacing just changed completely. And now you had all these intense stretches of flying with your jetpack, and they would be punctuated by these exciting sequences where literally everything changes. The controls, the visuals, the game speed, and most importantly, the consequences. We knew we were onto something, so we started adding more vehicles. Up next was the mech, Lil Stomper. I wanted to try and add more complex one-touch controls here, so you could actually jump and then hover a bit after your jump with a second touch. Initially, people died a lot when transitioning between the vehicles and the normal gameplay, so we added more explosions, like the solution to all of life's problems. And these would clear the screen and give people a moment to figure out the new controls again. We also added sequences of coins that would teach the player how to use the vehicles. So like there's arrows for Gravity Man, and it acts like a tiny tutorial built into the game to help you get recalibrated or remember how it feels. And just like when we added weapons in Monster Dash, each vehicle we added to Machine Gun Jetpack just got crazier and crazier. We added the Money Bird, which was gently and maybe not very subtly poking fun at both Angry Birds and Tiny Wings. We added the Crazy Freakin' Teleporter. And like I mentioned before, we didn't have like a modern game engine. So every little detail, every explosion, every puff of dust, this was all done by Woody manually, with Sierra and I crowded around, literally looking over his shoulders and tweaking it together variable by variable. We were proud of the attention to detail and the subtle touches that gave the game its distinct feeling. We also had to be careful with how many vehicles we added though. Everyone had their favorite, and so if there were too many, then it felt like you never got your favorite vehicle, but if there weren't enough vehicles, then it kind of felt like you always got it, and then it stopped feeling special. The vehicles really gave the game its own unique identity, while fixing the pacing and the intensity issues. I really think that this decision was possibly the most pivotal one to Jetpack Joyride's eventual success. So I actually filmed all of this other footage like a few weeks ago, and I was just out walking this trail and I realized I forgot a section. So I'm like, let's just film it now. Basically, I just wanted to quickly say, I'm not taking sponsorships for my videos at the moment because instead of doing a sponsor segment, I'd much rather tell you about the game I'm working on right now. It's called Feed the Deep. It's an underwater roguelike. This is my first indie game since I quit my job, and I'm making it completely solo. It's going to be out on Steam middle of next year. There's a link in the description. You should check it out, wishlist it, and then I can keep making games, keep making videos and all that stuff. So yeah, thanks. Back to the video. Another one of the big things I wanted for this game was for it to have a shop. So I mentioned in my Fruit Ninja video how I really wanted to avoid having a shop and currency because it didn't feel right for Fruit Ninja. But here, it was the opposite. We had masses of coins and a slot machine. I wanted there to be all kinds of outfits for Barry so the players could earn and buy, and also so they could express themselves. But overall, I just wanted to give ourselves an option of making it super easy to update the game. Like at the time, I was literally still in the middle of experiencing the pain of how hard it was to update Fruit Ninja. So making this next game easy to update and add content to was top of mind. Everything had to be built in an extensible way, so we could keep on adding to the game long term as painlessly as realistically possible. I made a lot of concepts for how the shop should look and work. At first, it was kinda like the Fruit Ninja menu, but it slowly evolved. I really wanted to have flavor text and for the whole thing to have a bunch of personality to it. When I started to get stuck, I looked for inspiration on the App Store. You can see how these inspirations eventually carried over from the arrow icons to the sides to even having the shine and emboss on the icons. We had so much fun adding things to the store, we even added Phil. These were the reference photos I took of him with my iPhone 4, and then Sierra turned that into the character in the game. We had a lot of fun putting ourselves into the game in other places as well, like as achievements. Woody's achievement was for just running into the bottom zapper over and over, because that's what he often did while debugging parts of the game and testing things. And Sierra's was for just staring at the shop screen, studying the details. Alright, so we have to talk about the music. I think most people can agree that the Jetpack Joyride theme song goes hard, but it was actually a really long road to get there. The sound designer and composer for Jetpack Joyride was Cedar Jones, and he had actually only just started at Halfbrick. In fact, he had very little experience of making music tracks at this point. I feel sorry for how much he got plunged into the deep end on this project. Phil and I would come into Cedar's studio and listen to the tracks as we collectively tried to find the right style. To start with, we just had the original Monster Dash music by Jesse Higginson. This was in the game right from the start, just by default, seeing as it was already in the branch from Monster Dash. So a lot of the earlier music tests followed this same kind of vibe. This didn't really feel quite right to us, but we couldn't quite put our finger on why. So next we suggested, let's try something a bit more metal. Like after all, the game is literally metal and explosions and guns. But this isn't right either. I think the problem is that the game at its core is playful. Like sure, it's like machine guns and explosions and labs, but as you're playing, you're like grabbing a whole bunch of coins and it just didn't seem to mesh quite right. So after being stuck on this for a while, we decided to try a little circuit breaker and have Cedar trying to write some jazz. This worked surprisingly well, and now you're starting to hear the elements that make up the final product. But now, because it's an endless runner, we felt like it was lacking a beat to kind of drive it forward. So we put the jazz thing on the side for a bit and asked Cedar to try a darker style with a beat. This was nice, but a bit too dark and not quite catchy enough. So then the next version sounded like this. Okay, we're getting close. We thought for the next step, we might funk it up a tad. Okay, so this is very close to the final track, but it still had this kind of happy synth thing that didn't fit quite right. So the next idea was to get this and then re-add back some of those jazz elements from a few versions back and I specifically remember the moment where Phil and I were standing in Cedar's room and we heard this for the first time. And we all just kind of like looked at each other and we were like, holy f. That's it, done, perfect, ship it. It's awesome listening back to all of the old versions because you can kind of pick up all the elements along the way that made the final track what it was. So after actual months of experimenting, Cedar absolutely knocked this out of the park. To date, it's still my favorite song of any game I've ever worked on. And like, I legit think it's a serious contender for one of the best theme songs on any mobile game, for sure. Okay, so by now, the game was getting pretty close to complete, but it was still missing something. I didn't know what yet, but it was definitely something. And then in March 2011, I was flying to GDC and I spent like half of my 14-hour flight just playing the latest iPhone hit, Tiny Wings. It was amazing, I loved it. And one of the things I really liked was the neat little missions it would give you to upgrade your Nest multiplier. But it was pretty far from perfect. For one, you would often get stuck with just a single mission to do, and that would be super difficult. And until you cleared that, there was no progress to be made. When I got home from GDC, I took this inspiration and started messing around with a mission system for Machine Gun Jetpack, trying to extend on Tiny Wings' starting point, but having the player not get stuck so often and making it feel much more rewarding. The first idea that popped into my mind was to have a set of 3 missions every day. There would be an easy, a medium, and a hard one. So that way you could never get stuck for more than a day, and there would always be a goal to work towards. We tried this, and the immediate problem was that if you started playing a few days after your friends, you could probably never catch up. The next idea was instead of having 3 missions to complete, you had 2, and you just had to complete 1 mission or the other. So one of them would be a skill-based mission, but the other one would be something you could just grind out over time. But this felt grindy, like unsurprisingly, and only ever completing 1 mission at a time was just a bit boring. So finally we went with there are 3 missions, but the big difference was that every time you finished a mission, a new one would slide in. This way you would hopefully never really get stuck, and it also maximized the chances of completing more than 1 mission in a single run, which always felt great. Next we had to figure out the progression and rewards system for completing the missions. Like, what was your actual reward for doing these missions? I didn't want to do a multiplier like in Tiny Wings, because I felt like this meant you couldn't really actually compare your distances with your friends. I wanted the score to be literally how far did you go, not something arbitrary like I got 9,001 points. So one thing I tried for the rewards was this idea that every mission you completed, you could pick between the money or the box. You would either get a bunch of coins or an item. And the items were like literally these totally useless collectibles. Just cards to collect, I guess you'd say. They were totally absurd and varied from a lump of coal to an entire Hawaiian island. Again, this didn't quite work out because everyone always wanted the box and no one ever took the coins.
Or you can trade it all in for what's in this box.
The box, the box.
But ultimately, the items in the box had no real value. And I couldn't figure out a way to make them interesting without making like some other entire collectible card game that would sit on top of it. So the next evolution of this is just the classic experience point system, where you would get XP for completing missions. Leveling up felt really nice, and then you would get some coins as a bonus as well. But Bars filling up didn't feel quite right for the game either. Eventually we landed at the super crunchy, every mission is 1, 2, or 3 stars, and stars just like slam into place with particle effects and sounds and all that good stuff. And after that, it was just like a lot of tweaking and iteration. I'd play through the entire mission system every single morning for weeks, making changes and tweaking it for balance, cutting missions entirely, adding new ones, changing the order, trying to get it like just right. And now all of a sudden the game is like addictive. Like you have so many goals. There's like social goals, I want to beat my friends. Status, I want to level up, I'm currently level 231. Personal goals, I want to get the top hat. So many layers of feedback and reward all overlapping with each other. In total, we had spent 3 months just to get the mission system done at this point. So like 3 times longer than the entire original budget for the whole game. The very last thing I wanted to add was a way to make the mission system replayable. We added the idea of prestiging, just like copied straight from Call of Duty Modern Warfare, where you would grab a badge and just start the missions again. But instead of just progressing through the badges linearly, we decided to have these semi-random badges that you could collect. They were made up of 5 colors, 5 outer shapes, and 5 inner shapes, for a total of 125 possible badges. We assumed people would just like maybe collect 1 or 2 at most. So we thought it would be a good idea to like number and name every badge. This way the community could try and collect all 125 together and build the list of every possible badge. A lot of the badge names were just default based on the color and shapes, but a bunch of them had unique overrides with special names that like meant something. Like badge number 4 was named the Quadruple Badge of Bypass because my father had just undergone quadruple bypass heart surgery. At this point, the game was more or less done, but we still had a few surprises to deal with to get the game out the door. Since we'd been working on the game, both Retina displays and the iPad had been released. The game had great pixel art, but on a brand new iPad, for example, it was just too big a screen and the game now looked overly blocky. And we couldn't just make bigger assets, because at the time, games had to fit in under 20 megabytes, or people could only download them over Wi-Fi, which was a pretty major disadvantage. So we came up with an idea with the inspiration, once again, coming from our experience making Game Boy Advance games. So when we made GBA games, we used to often test them on an emulator, and people would turn on these like inbuilt scalers that made the games look better at high resolution on our computer monitors, while still maintaining a crisp pixel art look. There was a well-known image scaling filter called HQX. Internally, we called them the super sexy filters. It was actually company policy to never use these filters when testing our own GBA games, because it would stop us from seeing how the game would actually look on a final GBA screen. But here, it actually seemed like a perfect solution. So Woody built a system where after downloading the game, when you run it for the first time, it would select specific sprites and run them all through a custom HQX scaler he'd written. And then these would be saved to the device. This way we could have large, crisp sprites that would never have actually fit inside the 20 megabyte limit because it all got done locally on the device. The scaled sprites looked amazing as well because Sierra had made everything the way we used to for the Game Boy Advance, with really limited palettes and every texture being a power of 2. This had previously just been a stylistic choice, and now it really helped save the day on how to make the game look as good as possible on every device. We actually had to do the same thing in reverse for some other assets, such as menu items, scaling them down so that the game would always run at a smooth 60 frames per second on older devices, such as the iPhone 3GS. It even ran at 30, if you can believe it, on the iPod Touch 2, which was like an ancient device even at the time. So the game ran at 60, looked great on all of the different devices that had just been released, also it fit in under 20 megs. We were ready to release. So at this point, the game was still called Machine Gun Jetpack, and just like the music beforehand, this now felt like too much of an action hero metal name compared to where the gameplay actually landed. The big thing that made us realize this was actually when we worked on the icon. We couldn't fit the whole name on the iPhone screen. we had to shorten it to MGJP, which just looked kind of lame. Even the icon was still about being the jetpack, and the game was so much more than that right now. Phil and I knew this was an issue that we had to resolve before release. But the problem was, we'd already announced the name. It was at the start of trailers, it was even on signs at sponsored events, the lot. So we figured if we're gonna change the name, what's the smallest possible change we could make? And at one stage during brainstorming, we seriously considered the name Machine Fun Jetpack. Like Phil and I both convinced each other that this was a genius idea. It made the name more casual and fun, literally. The branding could still basically be the same. The next day we walked into work and both just said, what the f were we thinking? We can't call it that, that's horrible. After a lot more workshopping and roping in many more people in the company, we eventually landed on the final name, Jetpack Joyride, which in retrospect is a fantastic name, I think. Thank God we didn't go with Machine Fun Jetpack. And with that, we were done. We'd spent 10 months working on a one-button game. We were exhausted and we pressed the launch button on September 1st, 2011. On the first day of launch, the game was off to a flying start. Phil had been building a comprehensive marketing campaign for quite a while and had been super involved with the project throughout development. So this gave the game a really strong start. It quickly jumped into the top 50 games chart. We had a huge launch party the next day. The whole company, maybe like 50 of us at the time, went out to a Korean barbecue place. When we left, the game was sitting at maybe number 10 or so. Woody's wife, Charmaine, had made a huge Barry steak fries cake. It was a blast. And then midway through dinner, Phil jumped up on his chair and screamed out that we had just hit number 1 on the App Store in Australia. Everyone just went completely crazy. Like, I still get goosebumps thinking about that moment. Over the coming months, the game went from strength to strength. We smashed out updates as fast as we could, while at the same time, I also was working on Fruit Ninja updates. It was exhausting but exhilarating. And as the end of the year approached, Jetpack Joyride started picking up awards. Among these was the Game of the Year from Pocket Gamer. I was on stage to receive this award, along with our community manager, James Schultz. I managed to lift up the award that was made of glass straight into the champagne bottle that James was holding, and it exploded all over us right on stage. It felt so incredible for the game to both sell well and be so warmly received by so many players. We got so much fan mail and fan art posted in from all over the world. We were so proud of what we had made. I spent almost another 2 years working on Jetpack Joyride, and our team released another 13 updates. These included things like the gadget system, Flash the dog, which had a trailer that starred many of our own dogs, the Wave Rider vehicle, which Sierra actually designed and then built the prototype for in Game Maker on his own to prove the concept. And then almost 3 years after we'd started on Jetpack, just like with Fruit Ninja, I was burned out. I'd been juggling so many jobs and so many responsibilities for so long, I could no longer give this game my best. We went through a lengthy process of handing the game off to another team so that we could have a breather but also switch our attention to making more original IP for the studio. Jetpack has now had like, I don't know how many downloads, 1 billion or something. The game has shifted and evolved over time, was integrated with other brands, and just generally changed like many successful games do. And although it's a different beast now, Jetpack 1.0, I think will always be the game I'm most proud of. There is actually so much more I haven't mentioned here. For one, there was a lot of other people that contributed along the way, such as Jace, our incredible producer, who has just like enabled us to do all of this amazing work, Brent with the amazing QA team, Chenille, my boss. Making games is complex and involves a lot of people and a lot of contributions. So whenever I tell a story like this, I try really hard to make it accurate and include credit for everyone, but at some point, it's unrealistic to really include every single contribution. I really do try my best though. I also didn't get a chance to talk about stuff like all the little secrets and touches and details we added, the kick-ass trailer, or the asynchronous card-based multiplayer that we even made. That was obviously never released. There's just so much good stuff here. Hell, I think I could do like a 20-minute long video where I just sit down with Cedar and we go through all of the music track drafts in detail. If any of that sounds interesting to you, be sure to hit subscribe, like, comment, all that jazz. Be sure to watch the Fruit Ninja video as well if you haven't already, which goes into a bit more detail about what happened after I made those games and kind of how it impacted my career and what happened when I left Half-Brick. I also want to extend a huge thanks to Sierra, Woody, and Phil especially, not only for like putting up with my shit for all those years at Half-Brick, but also for being very generous with their time. They helped me fact-check this video, they read the script, and they're just amazing colleagues and friends as well. And so yeah, that's the end of this one. This is definitely an epic. I'm really not looking forward to doing the edit for this thing because oh my God, it's gonna be a monster. I swear to God, if any of this video like hasn't recorded correctly or if the audio is scuffed up or something, I'm gonna lose my damn mind.